because she thought a bomb had gone off, and the whole neighborhood thought it. That's what happened. As much as it is an icon, I think every car guy at some point wants to own a Ferrari. And I don't care if you're the Camaro guy or Dodge guy or whatever, everybody you want a Ferrari. And there's a Ferrari for every generation. And I always wanted a Ferrari. And it was never really within my financial reach. But one day, one came within my reach. A friend of mine calls me and he's like, I'm at an estate sale where mostly like Chinese paintings and jewelry and things like that. But they had a 308 GT4 there. And it was rough and it had just been pulled out of storage. And he's all like, opening bid on this thing is 16 grand. I'm like, for a Ferrari? He's like, yeah, because I don't think anybody's going to bid on it because everybody's here to bid on all the, other junk. So I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to go bid on a Ferrari. And she's like, good for you. You go bid on a Ferrari. And off I went, and I went to the inspection day beforehand. And there it's sitting there, and I'm like, all right, it's a little rough, but it doesn't scare me. And what scares most people, as it should, is any Ferrari that doesn't have any service history attached to it. The 308 GT4 was the Bertone body, the first Bertone design, and it was a wedge car, which was the Ferrari for me. I always loved wedge cars. And I'm like, oh, that looks awesome. But the little V8, again, and it was also the first Ferrari with a V8 in the back, could be troublesome, to say the least. Well, a couple people were looking at it. I weren't sure if they were interested in it. Something I didn't really take into account is I was wearing my Canepa jacket and hat because I had come over from work. And he's like, oh, absolutely, take a look at it. So I crawl inside, and the glove compartment opens this way from the top. And people were trying to open it. You push a button, they were trying to open it from the front, and they assumed it was locked. And the guy who was showing the car for the auction company was like, oh, it doesn't open. And I'm like, yes, it does. And inside was the last service record it ever had in 2012 before it was put in storage, and had $10,000 worth of work done to it. Carburetors were redone, everything was redone. It had belts, everything. I'm like, oh, well, that's enough for me. Boom, close it. Nobody knows how to open it. I at least have that bit of information. I feel much more comfortable. So I come back the next day, and standing next to me is the Ferrari historian for the local Ferrari club. And he's a great guy and a friend of mine. And he has two guys standing next to him who he was advising, apparently, on the purchase of this car. And I'm looking at them, and I look at them like, oh, you're here to bet it? I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm really interested. I'm going to bid on it. He's like, oh, okay. So bidding starts at 12. And there's a guy up front who's obviously a shill for the company. He waves his hand. So I'm like, 13? He goes 14. I'm like, 15? And then he doesn't bid. And then one of the guys bids like 15.5. And I'm like, 16? And they look at me and I'm looking at them. And I'm waiting for the counter bid. And I'm like, because I had prepared to go up, maybe 18, 19, really 20. Okay, so it's 20. So I'm ready to do that. And they're looking at me, and it's just a stare down. And the auctioneer's like, 16, 16, 16. And in this weird, where the universe stops for a moment, we're just staring at each other. The hammer goes, 16. I'm like, he goes, you just bought a Ferrari. I'm like, what? Like, what just happened? Of course, the first call is, honey, I just bought a Ferrari. It was okay. It was all right. But I'm like, okay, I am now a Ferrari owner. I'm now a proud Italian-American who finally owns a Ferrari. What I didn't take into account, I didn't realize, and it really was that I had all my Canepa stuff on. They thought I was buying the car for Bruce Canepa, and they didn't want to bid against him because you can't bid against him. He's just going to beat you out. So why run the price up? So right afterwards, they're like, is Bruce restoring this car? I'm like, no, I bought this for myself. And you could just see them go, oh. So I went over, paid for it. We fired it up. I was just ecstatic. You know, it was full of mildew. It was really, most people would never even touched it, but I was in love and I'm like, oh yay, a Ferrari. So I get it on my trailer and I take it home and I'm treating it with kids' gloves and I start going front to back and start working on it. And it's actually surprisingly a very easy car to work on. I was actually quite shocked. You know, if you can work on any old car through weight, not a problem. So I got it fired up, I got it tuned up, it sounded great. And I went for a drive, my first drive in my Ferrari, and I was just like, this is the best thing ever, except for the fact it scraped on every single thing it ran over. I was in heaven. I took it to a couple of Cars and Coffees and I parked it. And I have a 3-car garage at my house, my old house up in the Redwoods, in the coastal Redwoods of California. What happened was I have a Lemons race car that I was working on right next to the Ferrari. So there's my wife's Chevy Volt, the Ferrari in the middle of the garage, of course, and on the side, the race car. And this was January 2017 when these horrible storms came through California and just, you know, there were mudslides and all kinds of, I mean, it was 3 weeks of a deluge and really almost destroyed all the roads around us in Northern California. And we got up in the morning and my friend Peter Ralphs, who's a good friend and probably one of the greatest classic race car mechanics, fabricators ever, used to run the motorsport department at Canapa, is helping me with my little crummy Lemons race car. And we go out to work on it because we're tearing the front end off. It's a 70 Toyota Corona that we're going to put all the parts from an 87 Supra underneath. And we're cutting the front end off. We're going to put this 1JZ twin turbo, all this crazy stuff. So we're got the car and this wind is blowing and a storm is going. I said something that probably wasn't the wisest thing to say in retrospect. And we were in the kitchen. I was about to go out to the garage. And my wife's like, it's really storming out there. And she just come back from walking the dog. And she's like, it's really bad out there. And I said, this storm doesn't impress me. Okay. So the challenge has been made. And we went out to work on the car. We're both leaned over the front of the car. Peter goes to the side of the car to get something. I just turn around to the workbench behind me. And everything goes black. The top 35 feet of one of these big coastal redwoods had snapped off, come down, and crushed the garage. And it came right through the center of the garage, and it went right through the front of the Toyota Corona. So all the cars, you imagine all the cars are lined up like this. It came through the fronts of all the cars. And it cut through the roof like it was nothing. And it had huge branches on it that were that big around, that sheared off as it came through the roof line. And we had an attic in there. So it went through the roof, through all of our, you know, junk you keep in the attic, through the drywall, through the ceiling, right down to us. And fortunately for me, the drywall part of the ceiling hit me first and threw me under the workbench. Peter was saved by the roll cage of the race car because the roof line came down and hit the race car and compressed the race car roof down to the roll cage, and he was underneath that. So we both walked out unharmed from this. I did bruise my toenail. And that was actually interesting because the jack that was under the front of the car had fallen on the side, and the tree had landed on the jack, and my foot was right next to the jack. The worst thing that possibly could have happened with the best result. Like, it crushed a 3-ton jack. It just crushed it. And my foot was right there. There's debris everywhere. All you see is the junk from the attic and drywall and wood and the storms blowing and the rain's coming in. And I hear my wife screaming. She's, John, John, John. And I'm terrified. I wake up because you're kind of stunned for a little bit. And you kind of, seconds after, I'm like, a tree broke off. There's only, that kind of destruction only happens from that. But the garage doors had blown out because the whole roof line had come down. So you couldn't get in from the garage doors. And there was a side door blocked by all the debris. She's trying to get in. She can't hear me screaming, I'm okay, because she's screaming my name in the storm. That was the most terrifying part of it, because she thought a bomb had gone off, and the whole neighborhood thought it. That's what happened. So she finally gets her head in. I said, I'm okay. We dig our way out. Peter's first reaction, of course, being British, and I kid you not, was to ask for a cup of tea. So we went inside and had a cup of tea and looked at the crushed garage. And, you're a bit stunned by an event like this. And then I'm like, well, we got to get some tarps over the garage before everything gets soaked. So I climb up on what's left of the roof and trying to put these tarps on that we had. And I look down and I'm like, the Ferrari. Like, it didn't even occur to me. I did see the front end of the Corona, like just. Fortunately, there wasn't much there of the Corona. We had cut most of it off, so it wasn't a huge issue. Next to the Corona was the engine on the engine stand and then the Ferrari. I'm like, oh my God, like my Ferrari. Didn't care about the Volt. Who cares about the Volt? But the Ferrari. So we get it tarped off and start moving the debris away. And amazingly, and I kid you not, the Volt had chunks of wood and things sitting on top of it. The Ferrari was under a cover. There was nothing on the Ferrari. There was the dust and a few pieces of broken glass from the garage door. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. So we start pulling the debris away and we start clearing everything away from the Ferrari. And the tree is under the front of the Ferrari. Now the Ferrari was up on jack stands at the time, so it had a little bit of room. But the tree is under the front, like it had passed through the front of the car. And we're just trying, my friend and I were like, what is going on? I figured out later that the tree had come through and hit the engine on the engine hoist. It was on a chain. So it must have deflected the tree enough that the tree went around the front of the Ferrari and under it. So after all this destruction, the Ferrari is untouched. And that is how I knew God is Italian.